The purpose really of this resolution is to try to restore some sense of moral authority, not simply to the government, but indeed to the Dáil. Because in the good years of the Celtic Tiger, this government, and in fact the current partners in the government, have been particularly strong on this. They have consistently ripped away and taken away all of the things that were important in terms of Dáil debate and in terms of accountability. This is one of the few times that our economy is actually debated here in this House, because the government has become adept at debating the economy and giving the picture elsewhere. When Brian Cowan was Minister for Finance, he brought that particular art to its zenith. He was very rarely here ever to discuss issues. Even when he replied at something like parliamentary questions, he read pages of replies so as to leave as little time as possible for any honest debate or discussion. And to be honest, part of what happened in Lisbon last week is the whirlwind which the government sowed by refusing to show moral authority. The government refused, for instance, in the context of the cutbacks faced by many ordinary families, whether it's trying to decide how to meet the extra cost on fuel, whether diesel or petrol, or the extra costs in a whole myriad of other areas, particularly food and the supermarket shopping. And I know there aren't many of the government members on the benches over there who push trolleys around supermarkets. And there weren't many members of the government over there who stood outside supermarkets during the Lisbon campaign to talk to people coming out with their trolleys from the supermarket. Because if they did, they would know that ordinary families are finding it tougher to make critical decisions for themselves and their children in terms of allocating the resources and the downturn in resources that they are facing. So Owen O'Callaghan, that redoubtable Cork entrepreneur and builder, and perhaps potentially yet one day star of the tribunals, put it in a headline interview in the Sunday Tribune 3 weeks ago: there will be blood. I don't know that the Minister for State with responsibility for the Lisbon Treaty realised that the blood that would be all over the place would be the government's, in the context of the people giving the government a very rude awakening. And in many ways, the impression that the government has given in the last couple of days reminds me of the Bush administration and the Bush officials in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. We know what's best, we know how to deal with it, when in fact we haven't heard any concrete and serious attempt to address the issues. Just today, and earlier this week as well, Bloxham's and Alan McQuaid, who's one of the most respected and detailed commentators on the Irish economy, actually said in the report that based on our figures, we are in a stagflation environment and a recession is looming. Now, stagflation really takes us back to the awful period of the 70s, brought on partly then by the then oil crisis and the huge rise in the price of oil. It means that we have stagnant growth in terms of jobs and output, and not only are we experiencing in this country stagnant growth on jobs and output, we are actually experiencing a severe loss of jobs right across the board. But stagflation means stagnation plus inflation, and our inflation rate is continuing to hover all of the time just below 5%, and the European Central Bank doesn't sound as though it's going to bring homeowners any comfort anytime soon, because with their concerns about inflation, they are indicating very strongly to us that they may well continue to raise interest rates negatives over the next 6 months to a year and a half. So the pressures on the Irish economy are that all of those factors that Brian Cowan indicated in his last budget that could go wrong, they all appear to have gone wrong together. So in many ways, we are actually facing all of the negatives. And when you face a difficult situation, and I have no doubt that ministers are being confronted on a daily basis by the Department of Finance by what appears to be a consistent demand to cut current spending by about 8% or back to 2006 levels. The issue then is who is to bear the brunt of the cuts. And as far as the Labour Party is concerned, the brunt of the coming cutbacks that this government is planning but won't discuss with people is going to be borne by the most vulnerable and the most weak in our society. And to say that that's not fair is obviously true, but it also makes for really bad economics. There are people in this society who have done extraordinarily well out of the boom years. We do not need to punish people who are weaker in this society by making their difficulties even worse. And I worry about the participation of the Greens in this government because they don't seem to have any economic conversation with Fianna Fáil as the leading partners on the economy. We have a situation where our health service seems to be drifting hopelessly in terms of leadership. We have a situation raised almost on a daily basis by people in the opposition in this House about the lack of information and crisis in relation to nursing homes and payments for nursing homes. So the notion that the Dáil could toddle off with a bucket and spade to the seaside and take its holidays for 2 or 3 months or more from this House, it's actually obscene, to be honest, because there is important work to be done in trying to actually sort out where we are. There are plenty of positives in the Irish economy and plenty of positives in the Irish people. We have a can-do entrepreneurial spirit. We have well-educated young people. We have the mechanism to build the knowledge economy and move from this very negative period into a better growth period in 2 to 3 years' time. But only if we play our cards right, and only if the government does not act in a punitive way towards the weakest and the poorest people in our society. And in order to arrive at a consensus about how we do this, the government has to be accountable to the Dáil, and it has to come into the Dáil, and it has to be prepared to debate the economy. The government has plans in relation to the National Development Programme plan that largely depend, for instance, on public-private partnerships. We heard grandiose plans for this massive mega prison in Thornton, the destruction of an existing women's prison and its replacement out to a large prison in Thornton. We don't even have a costing on what that is likely to cost. We have clutches of grandiose, overblown elements in the National Development Plan, and we don't even have a forum in this Dáil as to how to discuss it in detail. I have great confidence in Irish people and their ingenuity and their hard work, because they have done that in spades for the last 15 years. People ended up voting no to Lisbon because they were uncertain about their future. They had a government which seemed to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to them. I mean, it could be said of Mr. Cowan, to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, that to lose one referendum is unfortunate, but to lose 2 referenda is a disaster. And uniquely under his stewardship, he has been he's played a primary role in the loss of 2 referenda. So One issue that the government hasn't addressed is that later this year or sometime next year we may actually exceed the Maastricht criteria. We may need to go to Brussels and discuss with partners in the European Union whether or not our investment programme in the National Development Plan allows us to in some way exceed the Maastricht criteria. And the way this government has behaved, will we have friends to count on then, or will we just get a rough ride? It's very difficult to say.